Dambisa, thanks so much for coming on Going Underground. Let's just start with what you think of the post-Brexit devaluation of the pound.
Well, too early to tell. I think there are two things that public policymakers need to determine. Number one is the timing. So obviously we're waiting for Article 50. The indications are now that we'll have a bit of clarity once March comes. But the other thing is the direction, the trajectory of public policy. We don't know exactly what the key drivers are. I mean, it could very well rally. I mean, I think there's an optimistic story still to be told about the UK. I mean, if you would have seen the IMF's new revisions to growth for 2017 just a couple of weeks ago in their World Economic Outlook, they think that the growth will pick up in the UK.
One of the hallmarks of your work has been a hatred or critic of ossified bureaucracy and red tape. And yet, you said in the end you did want Britain to remain in the EU. Why?
It wasn't the support of bureaucracy or the status quo. My argument was not based on economic arguments. A lot of people will talk about trade and what the implications might be of that, nor was my argument about the sovereignty issues. It was really about the need for Britain to maintain an important and central role in the global debate. There are so many challenges now. Global growth has slowed. I referred to the IMF report which just came out, and they've downgraded global growth again for 2017, and really a lot of the forecasts for the next several years are that it's down.
British growth.
Well, only Britain, but I mean the rest of the world is, there is a drag on growth, and of course we're seeing incredible and increasing political uncertainty around the world, populism in developed countries, and obviously with the skew in demographics in developing countries, there's real risk of ongoing political uprisings. So that backdrop requires, adults in the room, and I think Britain does need to maintain a role, whether it's in the UN Security Council or certainly a seat at the table in the EU. I thought it was been advisable. But clearly we are where we are, and we're going to have to make do with the situation as it stands.
Tell me a little bit about what you've written recently about the contrast between growing inequality in Western countries versus lessening inequality in places like China.
So the main point there is that we certainly have seen an improvement in income inequality between countries. So clearly the rise of emerging markets has meant that the difference between developed and developing countries has come in. The problem is that within income inequality has widened. It's gotten worse in places like the United States. And the contrast that you're alluding to is this weird thing that democratic societies like the United States with market capitalism have the same income inequality as a country like China, which is state capitalist and has deprioritized democracy. So I've been fortunate enough to travel to about 80 countries, and people ask me all the time, well, which model do we pick if we really care about income inequality? And I think those are the sort of debates that we need to have now, given that income inequality has become such a big problem.
Of course, and in those BRICS countries, if we widen it out, people are looking for more democratic control, more kind of political say, whereas in these Western countries, people feel that they're increasingly they're governed by those who are out of touch.
Well, I think that the thing about living in this period is that we don't have clarity on what the direction is politically or economically. And I think we do need to revisit a lot of the models and the strictures that we relied upon in the 20th century. You allude to a love of democracy. Well, even that is under challenge, not just because of the rise of China, a clearly country that's deprioritized democracy, but also
although China would say it doesn't. It's
well,
I
spent an hour with the Chinese president. I'm not entirely sure that's the case, but more importantly, the World Economic Forum has just issued a report talking about how they've done a survey across developed countries that are mainly democratic and countries that are mainly authoritarian, and people in authoritarian states trust their leaders much more than people who are in democratic states. So it's that kind of evidence that I think makes it a bit queasy to just say, oh, democracy is the answer.
But when it comes to corporations, I mean, you've written about this as well. Why do you think they strategically don't understand, and I know that you've picked out two cases recently, that say the big multinational Philips company couldn't imagine that US regulators would stop their move to Asia, $3.3 billion move, and you've also talked about the Pfizer AstraZeneca deal. I mean, are these corporations not really understanding what these regulatory frameworks and the geopolitical pressures on them?
Because for every example that we can pick where a transaction has been blocked, so in this case, the one in the US was blocked by CFIUS, which is the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which bars certain investments from foreign countries. For every one of those types of transactions, there are other transactions that have gone through quite successfully. SAB Miller, the beer brewer, upon which I sat on their board, we sold that business. We had to get regulatory approval, not just from the United States, but from China and from other governments around the world. So I think it's a bit narrow to say, oh, the trend is absolutely to bar international transactions. I mean, I think it is challenging, and obviously there are issues of cybersecurity and more generally around international security, national security issues that dominate.
Do you see Donald Trump as being more protectionist
Than
Hillary Clinton when it comes
we
to
don't
trade?
know. We have absolutely no information about either side's public policy, and in fact, if anything, I think there's a bit of convergence around their desire to be more protectionist. But just to be clear, it's a trend that is across the developed markets now and developing countries. Just last year, we had 644 new tariffs and quotas to bar international trade, cross-border trade. The largest imposer of those was the United States.
You weren't surprised that TTIP collapsed?
Not entirely. I mean, it's a bit disappointing because I grew up in the globalization era, Washington consensus, more integration around trade, around cross-border capital flows, around the movement of labor, the sort of size of government. These are really the big tenets around the globalization agenda. So I think that it is absolutely the case that after sort of 20 years of that agenda, we have seen economic growth, but we've seen a deterioration of real wages. We've seen much more disaffection in terms of income inequality widening. So the notion that public policy has to respond to the mood and the zeitgeist means it's not surprising that there is a mood towards deglobalization. I mean, people are suffering under what they perceive to be a globalized world.
You mentioned you're on quite a few boards of big companies. How difficult, regardless of this context you've just been talking about, is also the context of environmental actions?
Running a global business with 100,000 people is incredibly complicated. Try managing 2 people. I have 2 people work for me full time. It is very difficult to manage 2 people. So try 100,000 in 70 countries. The part of the job of the board, but also management, is risk mitigation. So there is, of course, an understanding that we have to focus on climate change and environmental concerns. We have to focus on income inequality, aspects that used to be really the domain of public policy and social, and not the aspects for business. The mood has changed. Those aspects are now absolutely front and center in the discussions in the boardroom.
Dambisa Moyo, thank you. After the break.